Goldman Sachs Investment Banking released a report in 2025 titled Powering the AI Era. This is not an ordinary industry report. It is signed by Dan Dees, co head of global banking and markets at Goldman Sachs, representing the firm's official judgment on AI infrastructure. The report opens with a set of numbers describing what is happening in this industry. In 2024, the world's largest technology companies are burning $800 million every day to build AI infrastructure. The capital expenditure plans announced by hyperscalers will exceed $1 trillion by 2027 combined. Private equity funds still have $4 trillion in dry powder waiting to be deployed. Sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, insurance companies, all long-term capital is chasing the same target: AI data centers. When you see these numbers, your first reaction might be, the biggest challenge in this track is financing. Whoever can raise the most money will run the fastest. Then Goldman Sachs destroys this intuition with one sentence from the report: a lack of capital is not the most pressing bottleneck for AI progress. It's the power needed to fuel it. Not algorithms, not chips, not talent, not money. It's electricity. This answer seems too simple, so simple that it feels like it must be wrong. It isn't. The power supply gap is not a feeling. It is a ratio. The stable electricity that global data centers can obtain today, divided by the electricity that AI workloads actually need today. When this ratio is below 1, the construction speed of AI infrastructure is physically constrained, no matter how much money is in the account. To understand this ratio, you first need to understand how hungry AI server racks are for electricity. 5 years ago, a standard cloud computing rack required 5 to 15 kilowatts of power. Today, an AI factory-level rack requires more than 500 kilowatts. In the same cabinet position, power consumption has increased 50 times, not 10%, not double, 50 times. When a building is filled with such racks, it needs more than just more wires. It needs an entire liquid cooling system to prevent the machines from burning themselves. It needs dedicated substations. It needs to negotiate capacity quotas with the entire regional power grid. This is why data center vacancy rates are only 3% today, and close to 0% in some core markets. It's not that there is no land. It's not that there is no equipment. It's that there is no electricity. There is another number worth pausing on here. The construction cost of a 250 megawatt AI data center is about $12 billion. But within this $12 billion, the GPU equipment inside is 3 to 4 times more expensive than the steel and concrete outside. Without electricity, these billions of dollars of silicon chips are just extremely expensive scrap metal. Capital has not failed. Capital is blocked by a more fundamental constraint. Global data center power demand will grow 160% by 2030. What is the physical meaning of this number? From 2019 to 2024, global data center capacity grew from 30 gigawatts to 57 gigawatts, requiring $324 billion in investment. By 2030, another 65 gigawatts will need to be added, completing the same scale of expansion in a shorter time window. 160% demand growth. This is a demand curve the industry has never experienced in 60 years. If the power gap is the problem, why not just build more power plants? This is a reasonable question. The answer is that supply elasticity is extremely low. Not relatively low, it is structurally low. So low that it is completely out of the same time dimension as AI's iteration speed. It takes 5 to 7 years for a natural gas power plant to go from permit application to grid connection. This is not the construction timeline. This is just the permitting cycle. The same is true for transmission lines. The average age of US power grid infrastructure is already 40 years. Connecting a new power plant to the grid involves federal and state-level permitting processes, interregional grid coordination agreements, and already full interconnection queues. Physical laws do not accept expedited service. Nuclear power is 24/7 stable, clean energy, and the ideal match for data centers. But the case of Vogtle Unit 3 shows the cost. The project ultimately cost more than $17 billion, over 100% above the original budget, and was 7 years behind schedule. Renewable energy is the fastest incremental option, but wind and solar only generate power when the weather cooperates. AI data centers need 24/7 uninterrupted baseload power. Battery storage technology currently cannot support long enough discharge times. This is the conclusion of Goldman Sachs' research calculation. Of the 160% demand growth, about 60% must come from new capacity. This 60% is not an abstract percentage. Goldman Sachs explicitly breaks it down: 30% from combined cycle gas turbines, 30% from natural gas peaker plants, 27.5% from solar, and 12.5% from wind. This means that in the next few years, we need to actually build how many natural gas plants and install how many square kilometers of solar panels. And all of this is after that 5 to 7 year permitting timeline. The 160% demand is hitting a wall composed of permitting cycles, aging grids, and physical laws. Before 2028, 60% of new capacity cannot be deployed at scale. Now for the most counterintuitive part of this story. Most people think that the power gap will disappear as capital floods in. With trillions of dollars in investment, policy support, and technological progress, the gap should be filled. This logic is wrong. Before the gap is physically resolved, it will redistribute profits across the entire value chain. Whoever controls scarce electricity controls the speed of AI. Hyperscalers have already realized this. They are no longer just buyers of electricity, they are becoming producers of electricity. Meta is building a 2 gigawatt self-use data center. Microsoft signed a 20-year power purchase agreement with Constellation Energy to restart the 835 megawatt Unit 1 reactor at 3 Mile Island. Alphabet is laying out 3 advanced nuclear sites. The Stargate project takes this logic to the national level. A joint venture between OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank plans to invest $500 billion in developing digital and energy infrastructure. The first data center will land in Abilene, Texas, with site selection criteria: energy-rich and sparsely populated. The Trump administration simultaneously signed 4 executive orders aiming to increase U.S. nuclear capacity from the current 100 gigawatts to 400 gigawatts by 2050. These numbers look huge, but even a $500 billion national level plan still has to wait in line for that 5 to 7 year permitting timeline. Executive orders can express willingness, but they cannot shorten the curing time of concrete or speed up the certification cycle of uranium fuel rods. This action itself produces a consequence. When the largest demand side begins to bypass the public grid and take power directly from the generation source, the cost borne by ordinary electricity users will rise. U.S. residential electricity bills have already increased 23% from 2019 to 2024. Rising electricity bills trigger regulatory attention. Regulatory attention tightens permitting approvals. Tighter permitting approvals extend waiting times. Extended waiting times maintain power scarcity. Power scarcity continues to drive up electricity bills. This is a cash flow pressure feedback loop. It does not need technical failure to operate. It only needs the speed of electricity price increases to exceed the regulatory tolerance threshold. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has already rejected some plans for data centers to co-locate with nuclear power plants. Local communities are protesting the pollution from xAI's Memphis facility. This is not a theoretical risk. It is already happening. 160% demand growth, 60% needing new capacity, a 5 to 7 year permitting cycle, while bearing 23% electricity price increases, 4 clocks running at the same time. None of them are synchronized with the others. The last question, and the one that capital truly cares about, is not who will win. It is, when the power gap moves in any direction, whose business model can still operate? Because the gap will eventually be filled. Given enough time, permits will be approved, power plants will be built, and the grid will be upgraded. By then, the scarcity premium will disappear and pricing power will be redistributed. At that time, who will still be making money? The holders of transmission infrastructure. No matter what energy source is used, electricity needs transmission from the generation point to the data center. When the gap is large, transmission demand is large. When the gap is small, new power still needs transmission. U.S. grid investment is expected to exceed $700 billion before 2030, and this number does not change with the size of the gap. Holders of long-term power purchase agreements for nuclear assets, 30 years of uninterrupted, clean baseload power. This is what data centers truly need. This revenue stream does not depend on whether AI computing demand continues to grow exponentially, only on whether that reactor continues to operate. Holders of CMBS and ABS after data centers are stabilized. When a data center is completed, fully leased, and begins generating cash flow, it becomes a bond like asset with fixed income. The first data center, CMBS, was priced in 2021. Today, this product already accounts for 13% of the SASB market, and in 2025, there have been multiple transactions exceeding $2 billion. Then let's look at the cyclical cognitive error. In 2021-25, the mainstream judgment in the entire industry is training large language models will always be the largest power demand source for AI. Therefore, the optimal investment is to build super large training data centers in remote places with cheap land and cheap energy. This judgment has sufficient data support, the consensus endorsement of countless analysts, and the capital commitments of hundreds of billions of dollars from hyperscalers as proof. Then DeepSeek released an open source model in early 2025. Inference workloads need to be close to users, need low latency, and require completely different location and power consumption designs from training. Large training data centers locked in remote areas may face asset stranding risks. There is a structural conflict worth clarifying here. The construction decision cycle for data centers is 2 to 3 years. The evolution cycle of AI technology architecture is 6 to 18 months. A decision-making system that operates on a 2 to 3 year cycle is trying to track a target that changes on a 6 to 18-month cycle. This is not a cognitive error that happened only this time. It is a structural trap determined by time mismatch, which will repeat at the eve of every technological paradigm shift. There is one more risk that needs to be made clear at the end. This industry has not only physical boundaries, but also geopolitical boundaries. What is installed in data centers are cutting-edge semiconductors subject to export controls. Which countries can build what specifications of data centers is no longer just a commercial decision. It has become a diplomatic decision. Export controls can force the shutdown of AI computing construction in a certain region at any time. This risk is not in any financial model. It is in the sanction documents. The biggest risk is never the power gap itself. It is believing that you have found a permanent answer at the moment when the gap is the largest. The infrastructure bottleneck of every era is never solved by capital. It is solved by time, by permitting, by physics, and nothing else. Before that, whoever controls scarce electricity controls the speed of AI.